Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me today on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we pair those games together, perhaps new to the show, welcome to the show, happy to have you here. It's because all those games share the same fantasy setting. So whether you're someone who heard about Avowed and you're very excited about exploring that game and that world, or you're someone who just loves Pillars of Eternity and you want to learn more about the lore of a world that you already love or hear about again, welcome to the show, happy to have you here. Today will be a friendly episode for new listeners and old listeners alike. I do want to say right at the start, though, just a quick apology. I have been sick the last few days. I didn't think I was going to be able to record today. This morning, my voice was almost gone entirely, but I have been drinking water like a madman, and so I've got it to a point where I guess now it's audible. We'll see whether or not I can make it through an entire recording, but I just apologize in advance if it doesn't sound good or if the quality of my voice degrades over time. So I will try my best to stay on top of that. As well, thank you for your understanding. Last week, I didn't have an episode out. My 2-year-old son has recently entered into a sleep regression, or something like that. I don't know. Basically, he just doesn't want to go to bed alone. He doesn't like being in his bedroom by himself. I don't know if it's because he's having nightmares, or if he just understands now that, wait a minute, people do things while I'm here in bed. I don't like that. I don't know what's going on. It could be a number of things, and we're just doing our best to try to make a safe emotional space for him, but also set those boundaries of like, hey, this is bedtime and this is what you need to do. So, hey, any parents out there, if you've gone through this and you have any advice or encouragements to offer, hit me up, worldofeora@gmail.com. But no, we're getting through it. It just kind of came out of nowhere at level 10, so I didn't have time to record last week. But it's an adventure. It's cool to see him grow up. Anyways, sorry about that. That's a divergence. We don't need to hear about that. Today, we're going to be talking about a character from Pillars of Eternity 1, although not a character that you actually get to interact with. You actually just get to hear his stories. And technically speaking, he does have some involvement in the second Pillars of Eternity game in the sense of he explored that area a lot, and he contributed to the exploration of the Deadfire, which is the setting for the second game. But again, this is not a person that you get to interact with. I don't know if he'll be in Avowed in any way, shape, or form. I mean, he won't be. He won't be in Avowed, but maybe his presence will have been felt there, or we'll find a journal or something. Anyways, I'm talking about a character whose name is Fulvano. And if you've played Pillars of Eternity 1 very thoroughly, then you'll probably be familiar with the story of Fulvano, or at least it'll sound familiar to you. And so we're going to follow his journey and the things that he's been going through in today's episode. Nothing to discuss in terms of news. We don't know anything about Avowed or Pillars of Eternity, or there's nothing Obsidian related that I really need to bring up. I'm just looking forward to the June 9th showcase. There is a rumor that Avowed will not show up at the June 9th showcase, but instead will have a short appearance at some other showcase the day after. I haven't looked into this. I'll get information when it shows up. I don't really care to keep up with it 100% or anything like that. Not because I don't want to, but just, rumor is rumor. When I see it, that's when it's official. So anyways, either way, I'm looking forward to the showcase. It's always nice to see new games, and there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out on the Xbox platform that I'm interested in, despite all of the recent controversy with some of the decisions they've made. But yeah, so that's it. Let's just let's get into the episode today and talk about the lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So all of today's information I'm going to be reading off of the Pillars of Eternity fandom website, pillarsofeternity.fandom.com. Most of this information, though, does come from text that is taken directly from the game itself, so we know there's not a ton of speculation. At least once we start getting into the story of Fulvano's actual events within the first Pillars of Eternity game as we interact with them. But here's some background on Fulvano. Fulvano is a famous explorer hailing from the Vailian Republics. Vailian Republics, I'm not going to dive too deep into that. It's one of the cultures and factions of this world. It's one of the newer nations that exist within this world. This fantasy world, like many fantasy worlds, has its own unique history leading up to the time when you, the, observer of the world through games and stories and all that, interact with it. And the Vailian Republics is one of the newer nations to come about. You don't actually get to go to the Vailian Republics in the first Pillars of Eternity game, but it is set on the same continent, further to the south from where you play the game, within the area known as the Deerwood. The Vailian Republics are basically a set of city-state confederacies that came out of the old Vailian culture and nation, which is now defunct and collapsed. If you're interested in learning about Vailians in general or the Vailian Republics as its own culture and nation, I've done an episode on that. Feel free to check that out. Episode number 52. And you'll understand their culture a little bit better by checking that episode out or by just, playing the game, but up to you. So Fulvano is a famous explorer hailing from that area. He's left Vailian Republics to explore the world at large, which is why I kind of surmise that there is the chance that we will see Fulvano's I guess, impact in the Living Lands when we play Avowed. There's a chance that we might find old notes of his or something like that, or he might have charted an area, or we might have access to maps in the Living Lands, and in the bottom right will be Fulvano's signature. Like, nothing crazy big, but just something small like that. There's a chance. The writers at Obsidian, they get pretty nitty-gritty into some of these details, and I could see them including that little thing for a player who is very, very in-depth on the knowledge of this world. But anyways, reading on more about him. He's known as an eccentric traveler with a wish to see the world, and he prefers to travel by foot wherever possible. This is very true. We learn about that just kind of reading these notes here, that he just travels on foot whenever he can go. He does this in order to gain the locals' appreciations of the sights, sounds, smells of the lands as he passed through the area, which is kind of true. I don't know if anybody here listening has ever gone on vacation somewhere, and then you get the advice of the locals on, like, hey, what's something really cool to see? And you always see the best stuff doing that. Now, obviously, sometimes people pull your leg and they tell you to go to a place that everybody knows about or is, like, supposed to be a big hidden secret, but really isn't. But I know a few times I've gone into the mountains of the Rocky Mountains here in Canada, and at one time, my wife and I were staying at a Airbnb, and we asked the person who owned the Airbnb, like, hey, well, like, what's an actual hidden gem around here, like, for real? And she did give us the location of this, like, it was kind of like this diving board that had been shoved into a rock by the locals here, and it stretched out over to a deep section of the river that was near the area. And it really wasn't a place that a lot of people knew about, and it was also kind of sketchy, to be honest, but it was a really awesome spot. It was beautiful. And so anyways, there's something we said about that. That being said, getting back to non-reality about Fulvano, being able to get to know the locals and actually explore the world on foot, it kind of just reinforced his view that anything outside of the Vailian Republics is a foul, smelly place that pales in comparison to his homeland. So this is a guy who basically just goes everywhere in the world of Eora and says, this is absolute garbage compared to my home world. Like, it's just complaining everywhere he goes. Which, to some Vailians, that might be pretty on point. His final voyage took him to the Eastern Reach, which is the continent that Dyrwood is on, the setting for the first Pillars of Eternity game, and it traveled around Gilded Vale, which is a town within the Dyrwood. He traveled around with a bunch of various guides and other travelers, and he would give them each a gift as he was going. These people end up meeting a sort of demise that makes me wonder if Fulvano was cursed in some way, shape, or form, because it's just really odd, the coincidence of all these people that were traveling with Fulvano end up meeting a pretty vicious end. His final goal was to reach a place called Anslog's Compass, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and this is where we're going to talk about the finale of Fulvano, and the reason why we won't really see him in Avowed. And the ending that he receives is, well, I don't know if anticlimactic is the word, but we'll understand more as we kind of go through some of his travels. So to give a background before we talk about his final trek through the Eastern Reach, the Gilded Vale and Dyrwood area, give a little bit of background as to some of the exploration he's done within the world of Eora. In the development for Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, which was funded through I can't remember, I think it was like a place called Fig or something. It's kind of like Kickstarter anyways, so the second Pillars of Eternity game was funded that way. There is a thing called Fulvano's Voyage, and this was a continuous stretch goal that was introduced during this Fig campaign for Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. And essentially, it was a in-world lore way of saying, like, these are the different places that we're going to put in the Deadfire Archipelago in the game, right? So the more backers that were on the Fig campaign that supported Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, the more locations that were made, such as Balefire Beacon or Dunmage, or is it Dunnage? Sorry, I keep saying Dunmage, but it's actually just Dunnage. I don't know why my brain sees an M there. A place called Dunnage, as well as the Drowned Barrows. So these are all locations in the second Pillars of Eternity game, and they were unlocked because there was enough backers that were adding to the campaign. But to put a kind of narrative twist on it and keep it in the lore of the world, Obsidian put these updates out of these locations in the Second Pillars game from the perspective of the explorer Fulvano. And so you have here journal entries of places that he has been through the Deadfire Archipelago. So before he ended up in the Eastern Reach, where we're going to talk about mostly what he did today, he was in the Deadfire Archipelago. He explored areas such as Balefire Beacon, which was unlocked at 20,500 backers. And in Fulvano's journal, his exploratory journal, there is a quote that said, "There she stood in defiance of time, an island capped with a stone tower, brooding and burning." Signed F, which is obviously Fulvano. This is just kind of a little quote that gives a description for Balefire Beacon. As well, there was an accompanying description, although I don't know if this is from Fulvano's hand in this world or if this is just the description that Obsidian gave. Centuries ago, a band of renegade dwarves fleeing the law erected the lighthouse fortress nicknamed Balefire Beacon. The torches burned with a fierce blue light, a rallying point for their like-minded countrymen comrades. What became of the dwarves is anyone's guess, but the lighthouse is now the keep of Captain Ferrante, the calculating leader of the Principe San Petrina and his crew of misfit pirates. So basically, that it gives a description of what Balefire Beacon is within the setting of the Second Pillars game, and it has this little quote for Fulvano. Now, there's not really much to get into here, and we're focusing on Fulvano's voyage more than anything else, so we're not going to get into the lore of each one of these locations. But suffice it to say, he's a pretty established explorer if he can get to these locations and then still end up on the continent of the Eastern Reach and do some exploring there. We know for a fact that in the Deadfire Archipelago, Fulvano explored Balefire Beacon, Dunnage, the Drowned Barrows, and the Splintered Reef, which perhaps we can talk about each of those on another episode. But you can see the length of Fulvano's voyage if you either were a backer for the FIG campaign or if you want to go to pillarsofterrain.fandom.com and look up Fulvano's voyage. There's a little image here in the form of a scroll that's rolled out, and it shows the voyage from one place to another and just how much area that this person spanned and how much traveling they actually did. And I think that this gives a really good scope of Fulvano's ability to explore. Like, he's not just this guy who's a famous explorer because he has a hot opinion on something. Like, he actually goes out and finds these places. And so that gives you a really good idea of the scope of which he does explore the world. And I think that even more so just makes the story of how his travels in the Gilded Vale area of the Deerwood has an impact. So going in order, we're going to read, there's an in-game clue as to a place that Fulvano is going next when we find like little journal entries. As well, there's an item that we can find as we're exploring the Deerwood in the First Pillars of Eternity game that somebody else had. And there's a note from a compatriot that he had, or a companion, or a traveling guide, or things like that. And we'll get to read lore from each of those. There are a set of pages that Fulvano had that he wrote in his journal, right? And you can essentially find all these pages in one area called Anselog's Compass, which is a place that he was trying to get to. You find all these pages, and they give you a clue as to the location of where his corresponding items are. So if you're trying to get Fulvano's boots, or you're trying to get his gloves, or whatever, these documents will give you clues where they are, and those are unique items, so they usually come with some sort of enchantment or power-up. And for those players who just like to find all of the unique shinies in the game, then this is the thing that you need, right? But they also offer a little bit of a narrative for what was going on with Fulvano when he was traveling. And so this is the first page. We're going in chronological order, and this gives a clue as to where the boots are for Fulvano's boots. While traveling west towards Gilded Vale, I encountered a fellow traveler of some considerable intelligence, and we engaged in pleasant conversation. It came to light that the poor fellow had the most execrable pair of boots upon him. I gave him one of my many spare sets that he might better appreciate Vailian craftsmanship. May they serve him well, for he said he intended to cross the wilderness known as the Black Meadow. I cannot imagine it is a pleasant place. So there's a few things here that we're talking about. One, he's traveling west towards Gilded Vale, which again is a town. It's a small village. Well, maybe not small, but it's a village within the Eastern Reach continent, specifically in the Deerwood region. I think actually it's in the Earldom of the Grass, but I can never remember that properly. But yeah, so it's a town. He was traveling west towards Gilded Vale. And it says here that he encountered a fellow traveler, and he didn't have very good boots, so he gave him a pair of his exploring boots, which is really nice of Fulvano. I'll give him that. Like, oh, hey, man, you helped a guy who was in need or didn't know that they had a need, and that's great. It is kind of funny that at some point here he does write, I gave him a spare set that he might better appreciate Vailian craftsmanship, which just kind of shows you his attitude towards his people, that he does think that he and his ilk are better than everyone else, especially when you consider that this is written as one of his journal entries. Like, he actually took the time in his own journal to write out this particular kind of thing, right? Like that's the kind of thought, he knows that already. He doesn't need to include it, but he takes the time to actually write that out. So it gives you a little bit of flavor of this person's personality. You eventually do find Fulvano's boots. When you read the thing, you find out that this explorer that he gave the boots to was heading to a place called Black Meadow. And that's a location in the game of Pillars of Eternity that you can actually go, and you can find the boots there. You find these boots on the corpse of a person, which we can only surmise is the traveling companion of the person that he ran into to gave these boots. When you acquire these boots, Fulvano's boots, you open them up in your inventory, you can read the description of them. On normal items, the item description is usually along the lines of, these are boots made here and they do this kind of a thing. When it comes to unique items, there's usually a little bit of a story going on about the person that had them, or a little bit of the history in the area. That's just something that's been common in a lot of RPGs. And so if we read the description for Fulvano's boots, this is what it has to say. Though never as famed as he would claim, the Vailian explorer Fulvano was known as an eccentric who wished to see the world. Where possible, he traveled by foot, wishing to gain a local's appreciation for the sights, sounds, and smells of the lands he passed through. In practice, however, Fulvano claimed that that his explorations proved only that the world outside of the Vailian republics was a foul, smelly place that paled in comparison to his homeland. This pair of boots is said to have belonged to Fulvano, and the initials burned into the leather would seem to bear that out. Fulvano was very particular about his boots, for they had to endure a great deal of use, and they were constructed to be as hardy as their wearer. So a lot of the lore in this first part here is just talking about Fulvano's personality and who he was, and some stuff that I've already covered when we introduced Fulvano as a character. And it gives us a little bit more uniqueness about Fulvano in terms of personality, that he would initial his boots, like he would burn his initials into it, and that he had them made in a very high quality because he was traveling everywhere on foot, as it says here, so it had to withstand a great deal of use. Again, it's nothing like world-breaking in terms of lore, but in terms of character building, there's already a lot going on here that we're getting just little glimpses of as the reader, knowing that he's an eccentric who wants to see the world, that he has literally a boots-on-the-ground kind of a guy, but thinks that his Vailian people are better than everyone else. But he's also the type of guy that gives out boots to someone who doesn't have as good a pair of boots, granted, so that they can experience true craftsmanship. But yeah, so we're learning more and more about this guy as we continue on. As well, you gain a pair of boots that you get to have in the game that give you +1 constitution, so that's always nice. The next page from Fulvano's travels that gives a clue to where his gloves are, it also outlines the next part in this story throughout the Deerwood in the Gilded Vale area. After several days' journey, it seemed it is time at last to part ways with my traveling companion from New Heomar. I pity we cannot see the compass together, but perhaps he will have as grand a time in Garen's grasp. I have given him my gloves for safekeeping, for I will hardly need them in such fine weather. Now that I read this, I am wondering if this should actually be the first thing here. Maybe this is more in terms of chronology. Maybe this happened before the boots page that I read earlier when he's heading to Gilded Vale, but either way, this is when he was heading in that direction. New Heomar is a location that we don't get to see in the game of Pillars of Eternity. It's mentioned only. And this reference here to the compass is Anslog's compass, the place that he was trying to locate in his travels here in the Deerwood. It seems that he was enjoying his time with his traveling companion, and it seems like he parted with his gloves with this person to give him for safekeeping. Perhaps it was a gift. Perhaps this is something that Fulvano does. It's just kind of a thing he does when he travels with people. He gives them something of his to remember him by. Or maybe it's about branding, maybe this is why Fulvano is a famed explorer, because he would give things out to people and then they would tell the story of this, maybe you go home and your kid's like, Daddy, whose gloves are those? And he's like, oh, this traveler Fulvano gave them to me, and word starts to spread, Now again, you get Fulvano's gloves if you follow this clue that says he was heading to the Grasp, or Galen's Grasp or something like that, which is the area that Gilded Vale is in. Now, it doesn't specifically say where he's going, but if you're very thorough in your exploration of the first Pillars of Eternity game, when you're in the Valewood, which is one of the early areas of the game that you get to explore, there is a corpse on top of a ruined wall to the south of this area's map of the Valewood, And in this corpse, when you loot the corpse, not obviously in the corpse, but if you loot the corpse of this body, you'll get Fulvano's gloves, which is sad to say that this is obviously the adventurer that he gave the gloves to died here. And unlike the person who had the boots, there is actually a letter accompanying the loot from this person. There is a scrawled letter, and it's penned from the person who died here. I do not think you will ever see this, but you were right, Fulvano. We should have journeyed south together and been safer for it. I would tolerate all the gloating in the world if I might live to hear it. I have put myself out of reach of the beasts circling below, but I am done all the same. I do not think I will rise again. Whoever finds this, pray for me. Perhaps in the next life I shall be a trapper of wolves. So there you get the story of how this person died, the person who has Fulvano's gloves, which you now, as the player character, will have. I guess that as he was in the area of the Valewood, a group of wolves came about him, so he climbed this ruined wall from some building and he was just waiting up there for the wolves to go away. But I don't know, maybe he was already malnourished to begin with, or what it was, but he basically expired up there. He just eventually died because he couldn't go anywhere. The wolves would get him. That's where this guy's journey ends. And this isn't the only person who's going to have stuff from Fulvano that is going to meet a demise, which again is why I'm like, is there something going on in the background? Because there shouldn't be this many interactions with a guy named Fulvano and then they die afterwards. But then again, I wonder how many people Fulvano interacts with. Like, are these just 4 individuals out of many, many, many more? Who knows, right? But still, I like to speculate that perhaps he's cursed. The next item that we're going to look at is Fulvano's amulet. And so first we're going to read the page of Fulvano's travels. So this is one of his journal entries. And it talks about a dear wooden woman. It says, I met a helpful dear wooden woman while in Gilded Vale. So he's obviously reached Gilded Vale at this point in his journey. She was an invaluable guide during my time in that sorry village, and agreed to accompany me some part of the way towards Enslog's compass. We parted ways in the wilds known as Magran's Fork, but I gave her my amulet so that she might remember me fondly. Perhaps I will return to these lands someday after all. So he, like I said, he obviously made it to Gilded Vale. He speaks highly of this woman. We don't know the nature of their relationship, if they were intimate at all. I mean, he does say that he wants her to remember him fondly, so maybe he had a crush on her? I don't know. Or maybe he just wants people to think of him highly. Who knows? I don't want to force a canon narrative of people just constantly romantically entangled when that isn't really how people operate on a day-to-day basis. He does refer to the village of Gilded Vale as a sorry village, which kind of coincides with the scrawled letter from the guy that died around the wolves that we just talked about, where he says he would put up with all of the gloating in the world if only he could live to hear it, which I think just goes to kind of show the kind of personality that Fulvano has on a person-to-person basis, right? We've known a lot about some of the things he's done, but then, like, how does he actually interact with people? And that scrawled letter really gave us the clue of, like, not only does he think that his people are the best, he also gloats about it. The Vailian craftsmanship, the Vailian ways of doing anything. So he probably constantly compared everything people were doing and everywhere he was going to the Vailians, and was actually expressing these views to the people that was around him. Maybe some of these people chose to split up with him because they were just like, I know it's dangerous, but I would rather travel alone than be with this guy who thinks that he's the best. So anyways, Fulvano and this woman split ways at a place called Magran's Fork, which is an area that you get to play within the game of Pillars of Eternity. And she doesn't get very far, unfortunately speaking. I'm surprised that he actually didn't hear her death screams, depending on how far she had to go. Because, again, if you're very explorative in your playthrough of Pillars of Eternity 1, you can find a corpse near a troll at the southern edge of the map in this area. And that corpse has 2 things. 1 has Fulvano's amulet, and 2, a chewed up letter. Both of those things we're going to discuss on today's episode. As with all the other Fulvano items, the first paragraph just says that he was never as famed as he claimed. The Vailian explorer Fulvano was known as an eccentric who wished to see the world, blah, 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 blah. All the stuff we've already talked about. The second paragraph says, this amulet is said to have belonged to Fulvano. He was a man much taken with mild superstitions, and this talisman, he said, was a source of luck. It also served a more sentimental purpose, for it depicts one of the great ships commonly seen at the docks of his homeland. So a couple interesting things here that we learn about Fulvano is that he is a man of mild superstition, and that's why he had this talisman. It's kind of like his good luck charm. And I'm not sure, but I speculate that, he was the type of person who knew that it didn't maybe do anything, but it made him feel better to have it around. Or perhaps he didn't think that, there's some essence in here because magic exists in this world, and maybe it is giving him a little bit of good luck. I mean, you as a player character, if you wear Fulvano's amulet, you get a reflex of +5 So that helps. It also gives you a healing bonus. So, maybe it was more than a good luck charm. But anyways, he had this talisman, apparently a source of good luck. He gives it to this woman, even though it had some sentimental value to him, which again kind of makes me wonder about the nature of their relationship and what he felt towards this person, why he would give this away. But whatever, either way. And it had a depiction of a great ship that was seen in the docks of his homeland. So not only does he love the Vailian Republics, but he also is literally adorning himself in ornaments, basically, that have depictions of things that are great from his home countries. This man is a patriot through and through, man. He loves his homeland, which, hey, you know what? That's great. I'm glad he likes it. I wish he wasn't as much abrasive about it, maybe. But, it's good that he loves where he's from. To a degree, I guess. This thing was supposed to be a source of luck. However, based on the chewed letter that we're about to read up and the corpse that we got these items from, I don't think that this woman was very lucky to have this amulet on her. So the chewed letter says, this piece of parchment is torn and flecked with blood and trottle spit. So it's probably chewed up a bit by the troll as it was devouring its meal. What little of it remains reads, worried he may have come to harm. Once I reach Defiance Bay, I will hire guides to take me back west in safety and see if we cannot find Fulvano. At present, I regret my eagerness to be away from Gilded Vale. It is very dark. And it just ends there. So it seems that she must have set up camp somewhere and she was writing down her thoughts for the day and just kind of journaling the stuff that she had done. And she's like, okay, you know what? When I get to Defiance Bay, which is the main city in this Deerwooden area, it sounds like she wants to hire some guides so that she can safely go to Anslog's Compass to try to find Fulvano. I'm guessing that she is worried that harm will come to him as he is adventuring alone, and she knows what this area is like. But she didn't even get to finish her letter, as she was likely attacked and eaten by a troll, or partially eaten by a troll. And so that's the third person that has traveled with Fulvano and got one of his items and then was killed shortly thereafter. And this one is very shortly thereafter. Like, it is not far away from where they might have split up in Mogren's Fork to where she died that the player character can find her body. It's almost like they get closer and closer. Like, they get less far away from where they split up before these people die. Which, again, is just going in my speculation, tinfoil hat theory of Fulvano was cursed. But the last letter that we're going to read here is actually about Fulvano himself, and this is a letter from Fulvano's journal titled Fulvano's Letter. How is it that so grand a journey as mine should lead me here? The people of the Deerwood call this pitiable lagoon a sight to see, but all I have experienced here is misfortune. I thought to explore the cavern by the waters, only to discover it was home to sporlings. I went to see the vaunted compass and lost a bulk of my letters when I tripped over some driftwood, and at last made to inspect the dragon skulls nearby, only to be menaced by some foolish little Zorops. I will return to Gilded Vale as soon as I catch my breath. At least the Zorops do not appear to have followed. The letter just ends there, kind of like the last one. I should read this like a Vailian. I think I would probably just get yelled at for, I don't know, appropriation or something, because they have a, what is it, like Italian or Catalan or a mix of French or something. Gillarde, like that's a word from the Vailian language that you get to hear a lot in the Second Pillars game. I don't know. My voice is going through enough today. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, so basically this letter is cut off. So he again was probably making camp or just writing his journal as he's wanting to do. And it doesn't look like he actually got to finish what he was writing before he was interrupted by something. By looking at the area and kind of like inspecting what happened, you get the idea that these Zorops, these little kind of, if you play Dungeons & Dragons, they're like kobolds, but they're not kobolds. They're just kind of like kobolds. They're these little reptilian humanoid creatures, about half the size of a regular human, but they can get together in pretty big tribes. They do actually have a sort of society. They're not just mindless beasts. They actually have thoughts, and they have religious views even, but they don't have a language because they're not really capable of speech. And so far in Avowed, we know that they're going to be an enemy of sorts. Hopefully, there might be more than just cannon fodder, but then again, that's kind of what they're there for in the first Pillars game, with a few notable exceptions, I might add. But anyways, I've done an episode on Zorops if you want to check that one out as well. So he, that is Fulvano, makes his way to Anslog's Compass and is not impressed by it. The people of the Deerwood think that this is a great place. It's a sight to see, is how he describes it, but he refers to it as a pitiable lagoon. If you went to the fandom article for Anslog's Compass, it's described as a sprawling beach just north of Defiance Bay along the Pearlwood Gulf. This beach does have a lot of giant rocks and caverns here, right? So these like kind of cavey areas within the cliffs that are embedded into the sand themselves. As well, there are some Zorop tribes living in the area. There's actually a decent amount of stuff that happens on Anslog's Compass in terms of like side quests and things like that. And so maybe we'll actually dive into some of the stories of these people here one day. But yeah, it's a beach. It's a rocky, cliffy beach area that, again, the Deer Wooden people think is a beautiful thing, but he's kind of like, meh. Which, I mean, what did he expect, right? Like, these are the people who live locally in this area. They are living among the pine trees and the foothills of these mountains or what have you, or the plains. I don't know how to describe the area of the Deerwood personally. To them, seeing this beach would be something out of the ordinary that they normally see, right? Like, you have to travel pretty far to go to a place like Anslog's Compass. So, of course, they would think that it's pretty nice there. This guy's traveled up and down the Deadfire Archipelago and through the Deerwood. He's seen so many beautiful things. What did he expect, honestly? He's just reinforcing his views at this point. Or, was reinforcing his views. It says here that a few things happened. One, he ran into sporlings, which are basically like humanoid mushrooms, which is a lot more awful than they actually sound when you dive into the lore. Sporlings can turn into dank spores, which are very slow and meandering, but once they get a hold of you, you're stuck, and then they just eat your soul very slowly. It's pretty awful horror kind of a thing. And then he trips over some driftwood, loses a bunch of his letters, and those are actually the pages that I'm guessing that you pick up as the player character that gives you the hints as to where all these items are, or the people that he interacted with, where they were going, and that's how you find the items. So that kind of talks about it there. It mentions the Zorops by talking about the dragon skulls nearby, and then it cuts off. And it's such an, I don't know, ignoble, is that the word? It's just such an ignoble ending for Fulvano. A famed explorer, so people will know who he is, and the places that he's been, the dangers he must have encountered throughout his travels in the world of Eora. And he basically goes to a beach that he calls a pitiable lagoon, thinking that it was supposed to be this great thing to witness. And as he's writing something down after just having a bad day at the beach of losing all of his letters and all this and running into sporlings, then he gets killed by a bunch of Zorops. Not the most, if you're doing a Let's Play of Pillars of Eternity, you get killed by Zorops, you kind of look at the camera and go, okay, we're just not going to talk about this because that was pretty embarrassing. Unless, of course, they're higher level and they swarm you or whatever. Anyways, that's besides the point. Like, it's just such a, I don't know. It's like, I kind of like that about the worlds that Obsidian makes and the stories that they tell, is they have this like authenticity about them that make them real. Like, like I was talking about Fulvano and that woman from Gilded Vale, and like my narrative brain wanted to like instantly ship them together, be like, oh, they liked each other. They spent a night together. But it's like, nah, he might have just been like, oh, she's a nice lady and I gave her a gift. Realistically, those are the kind of like relationships people form. I don't know. There might not be any canon idea for that there, right? But like, I love the writing that Obsidian does for this kind of a thing. And realistically speaking, great explorers sometimes meet endings that are just not really that flashy. It's just, oh, they had a misstep here and boom, they died, right? Like, there's a lot of animal experts in our own Earth history who have, gone up against sharks and, kind of like rolled in the grass with like crazy creatures at some point, and then they get stung by a bee or something and they die. And like, that's super sad, super tragic, but it's just like, that's kind of a realistic thing that happens. So it's almost humorous. Obviously it's not in real life, but like, it's almost humorous in this sense, reading these narratives of Fulvano and the great travels he's been in to end up at a beach that he thought was meh and be killed there. And so I don't know. There we have the character of Fulvano. And I'm going to end off with the final item that we can get that you can actually buy from a person named Ponamu Birdscorned, a character in Pillars of Eternity 1 and in Pillars of Eternity 2, actually. You can see him in both games. And he actually has a statue in the second game that's dedicated to him at the Kahanga Palace, but that's whatever. That's side lore for another day. He's at Anslog's Compass, and you can interact with this person and talk with them, and they sell things to you. One of the things that they're selling is Fulvano's blunderbuss. So I'm guessing that Fulvano lost his blunderbuss when he tripped, or when he was going up against the sporlings or whatever. He lost it in the sand, who knows? And Ponamu Birdscorn found it and was like, hey, cool, I could probably sell this for a couple bucks. If you buy the blunderbuss, or you just inspect it when you're in the merchant screen for this person, you can read the item description. The first paragraph is the one we've read 100 times already about who Fulvano is. But then the next two paragraphs read, though known more for his wanderlust than any great martial skill, Fulvano possessed an appraising eye for gear, and this blunderbuss seemed no exception. Despite its worn surface, the firearm functions as if it were made yesterday, its firing mechanism smooth, and its aim as true as one can expect for a shot slinger. The pristine condition may suggest that Fulvano never actually fired his gun, lending credence to an otherwise apocryphal quote often attributed to him. Lead and steel can rid you of an enemy, but only wine transforms an enemy into a friend. And so you have their quote of Fulvano, a famous quote. It was, although nobody actually knows for sure, that's why it's apocryphal, but, still. This is apparently a thing that he said a lot. Lead and steel can rid you of an enemy, but only wine transforms an enemy into a friend. And yeah, this blunderbuss looks like it was made yesterday. It looks to be in excellent, pristine condition. It looks like it hasn't even been fired, which maybe it wasn't. Perhaps he was not the type of person to fire a blunderbuss. Maybe he just had it on for emergency purposes. And again, it just talks about the great craftsmanship of how it was made and all that kind of thing, which is just typical Vailians. And that is the person of Fulvano. This episode went way longer than I thought it would, but that's okay. I like kind of diving deep into one character of the world and their history within it. We talked about Fulvano today, who has a history in the Deadfire Archipelago, having explored various islands that we actually get to go and see in the Second Pillars game. And he has this story of him trying to reach this place called Anslog's Compass, which was notable to the locals in Deerwood that he wanted to check out. And it just tells the story of all these people that he interacted with and the gifts that he gave along the way. And we learned actually a lot about his attitude and his personality, which leads me to a few things I want to say. The first thing being that I'm sure Fulvano was cursed in some way, because it's like he gave 3 of his items away, and then shortly thereafter, these people died. Like, something's going on there, right? Like, the one guy got surrounded by wolves, the other woman, she got eaten by a troll. It's just these things are happening to these people. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's an interesting idea. I haven't actually done a dive into curses. Now that I think about it, I'm sure curses exist. I don't know if they call them curses in this world, but like, I'm sure they must exist. I haven't actually dove into that. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's a good episode idea there. If anyone has any thoughts on curses, send me an email, World of Eora. Second thing that I want to bring up about Fulvano is that now that we've dove into this character as a person, for any of you listening who are tabletop role players out there, if you're thinking of a character that you need to make for an upcoming Dungeons and Dragons campaign or anything set in a fantasy world, why not use the story of this person here to kind of give you a basis to run off of? Like, you have a lot of descriptions about this person. You got a feel for his personality, a little bit of the flavor of the kind of person he was. Really loved where he comes from, to the point where he would brag about it. He had these little quotes and things that he would say. He loved his gear to be in pristine condition, and he had to have the best of the best. He just loved exploring. He is from a society that is highly economic. Like, they're big into there are a lot of mercantile companies out in the Vailian Republics. There's a lot about this person that you actually base a character off of. So I'm just like, I want to put that out there for anyone who's like, oh, you know what? I do want to make a new character for a campaign. And this would be a person for a DM to make, or for you as a player to create. And I think there's enough meat on the bones here that you could take that and then run with it and make your own thing. If you do that, hey, let me know how that goes, just because I'm interested in that stuff. The last question I'll ask, and this leads into the next segment of today's episode, is what might Fulvano have to do with Avowed, if at all?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Now, admittedly, Fulvano dies at the end of this, and Pillars of Eternity 1 happens before the time of Avowed. So the chances that Fulvano will make an actual appearance in the game of Avowed is incredibly slim. Like incredibly slim. Someone would have had to find his body, find a way to resurrect him in some way, shape, or form, which doesn't just happen in this world. You can't do that. There's an entire story of an ancient king who tried to do that, and it led to some pretty big problems within his society. So like that kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, there would have to be a monumental thing that happens within the history of this world for this one random dude. So I just don't think it's going to happen, that he's going to make an appearance there. But just like in Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, how we can see his impact of the places that he explored and read these journal entries of him discovering these islands and the thing like that. Even though that we didn't learn anything much about him or the locations, it was just sort of a lived-in world feel of like, oh, this famed explorer from Valia has been here before. I don't see why Fulvano might not have gone to the Living Lands. As someone who is a famed explorer, the Living Lands being a vastly unexplored area, there might have been a point in time where he went to go check it out. I don't know how far he might have gotten before he realized he's in over his head or what have you. Like, obviously, he didn't chart the entire area. But I don't see why there couldn't be the justification that Fulvano did make his way to Avowed. And I feel like really creative people like we see over at Obsidian Entertainment they think of fun little things to put in games that are like Easter eggs to other work they've done, or just fun little head nods to those that recognize the lore. I could very easily see people at Obsidian being like, hey, let's put a journal entry here or there, or an item here or there that's described as Fulvano's this or Fulvano's that. Perhaps there's another blunderbuss over there or something like that. Or maybe we run into someone else who knew him, So I don't, it's not out of the question. Do I think that it will happen? I don't know. There is a lot of characters like this in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. There are so many cameos, so many Easter eggs and head nods that the developers at Obsidian could give to player characters that they could probably make an entire game just doing that. And that wouldn't be a kind of game that most people would want to play, because it's I think the rarity and the far and few between of these Easter eggs, of these kind of things, that make them special. So I don't think we're going to run into that. Well, I don't think that the chances are higher than anything else, but I think Fulvano is one of those contenders for a small Easter egg in the game, because it's something that could very easily be put in. Like I said, a journal entry or an item description of some sort, or like campsite that is very old and just like getting grown over with moss and stuff that no one else has found, and that was maybe a place that Fulvano stayed. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility. And so hopefully something like that is in there. I love when developers do that, when they include those little things in there for players to find, that to new players is like, oh, that's pretty cool, neat, there's a person that was here, cool, moving on. Or to people like me who've played Pillars of Eternity 100 times, go and play Avowed, they find this and they're like, oh, I know who that is. That was rewarding to me. Anyways, that's about the extent of how I think this might have to do with Avowed. Not much, mind you, but something, possibly. So with that all said, let's close out today's episode. I like to tell you guys what I've been playing lately, so that, I don't know, I just like to talk about it. I don't have to have much of a reason other than that. If you've been playing the games I've been playing, then feel free to reach out, especially if it's one of the two that I'm going to mention right now. First and foremost, what I want to mention is I have played through a whole bunch of the game Animal Well, which a lot of you might have heard of. It's this Metroidvania where you're this little blob that's exploring this underground area. You don't really know much, right? Like at the start of the game, this isn't really a spoiler. At the start of a game, you get this idea that there are these 4 flames hidden throughout the map that you haven't explored yet. You can see them on the map, like, okay, I have to go get them. And so you go and get them and stuff. But as you play through the game, and you get to the credits really quickly, actually. Like, I think I got to the credits in 4 hours, or 4.5, something like that. Like, it was a pretty quick run through. But here's the thing. The credits, they're a lie. Don't believe them. That is not the end of the game. That was the introduction to the game. Congratulations. You finished the training segment when you get to the first credits. Now the real game begins. Because the game starts peeling back these layers. By giving you these items and all this kind of a thing, you start to realize, like, oh, I missed this and I missed that. Like, I didn't know I could do this or I could do that. So you start going exploring the world or the map of this game, realizing that there are so many secrets and hidden passageways and other things that are going on, that it was bigger than almost like the main portion of the first game, And so you spend a lot of time peeling back that layer, and then you start to realize that there's actually more layers beneath that of other things that are going on behind the scenes. And then you actually start to get into, like, what's actually going on in this game? Like, what's the lore? What's the story here? And you start to dive into all the iconography and the structures that you're seeing. And you're starting to pair things together, and you're like trying to draw conclusions in your head. And it's crazy. It's very expertly done. I don't think it's the 10 out of 10 game that people are saying it is. Like, the game is fun and it's really intriguing. But after a certain point, maybe you're like me, I kind of just got tired of going through the map over and over and over again, trying to find things that I didn't know I missed. It was cool to see these things. It was cool to see them emerge organically. That was really neat. And I think the developers should be praised for that, because that's not something that everyone can do, especially since this was developed by one person. But for me, anyways, that gameplay loop eventually kind of gets to the point of, like, why am I doing this other than just to find the secrets? So, I kind of, when I got to like the 3rd layer of hidden secrets, I got about halfway through and I realized I don't really want to finish it. I thought it was cool and all that, but I just didn't really feel motivated to complete that. But it was still a cool game, and if it's ever on sale, honestly, even the price it's set at is worth the price of admission. But if it's on sale and you're at all interested, go ahead and do it. And if anybody is playing Animal Well and you need a little bit of help, please send me a message, worldofaora@gmail.com, or hit me up on Twitter @worldofaora, and I will happily give you a hint, not a solution, a hint. I highly recommend trying to play this game as much as possible without guides. That being said, if you're like me, when I know how to do a solution, but I recognize it's going to be a time sink, I do look up solutions. And you can shame me for that if you want, but there was one puzzle that when I figured out what I had to do, I was like, that's going to take me hours. And I said, hell no. And I looked up the solution. It was exactly the thing that I thought it was. So, you take a little bit of a dice roll when you do that. But for me, as a person that gets to game an hour and a half every other day, I'm like, I'm not wasting that time when I know what the solution is. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't know. Judge me if you will, but that's what I did. The other game, so I finished that game. The other game I'm now currently playing is Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, which I'll talk about more on another episode because I'm only partway through that, and man, I'm just like, it's all I can think about. I go to sleep thinking of these puzzles, trying to figure out what can I do and how can I do it. One other thing I did really want to talk about was maybe I'll do it in next episode, but I do want to mention it here in case I forget, is a tabletop role-playing game called Roll for Shoes. Okay, like if you're getting tired hearing stuff, I'll make this really quick. Roll for Shoes. You can go to rollforshoes.com and all the rules are there. It's very, very short, and it's something that, like, if you have a tabletop role-playing group and one person not showing up means that the games get canceled or something like that, this is a really great game to have on backup because you can completely improvise everything, but there's even some prompts on that website for very quick one-shot adventures to go on, like one-session adventures. And the crux of the whole game is this. You start off with one skill called Do Anything Rank 1. And as you roll dice, when you succeed by rolling a d6 dice, if you get 6s on all the dice you roll, you gain a new skill. So like, let's say you do something in the game, you roll all 6s on the dice that you're using, and now you'll be like, oh cool, now I have Lying to Authority, rank 2. So anytime that you're trying to specifically do something that skill appropriates to, you now get to roll more dice and have a higher chance of success. And basically, as you're playing the character, you're building the skill set of the character. And it's just really fun, especially as you get further into the adventure in the session and you're like, how can I justify using this skill to do this thing that is in front of me? And it's just a crazy, crazy fun time. Highly recommend it. I want to talk more about in-depth some other time, but I'll get this episode out of the way now. Sorry for kind of going on and on there. Anyways, socials for the show. Email worldofaora@gmail.com. Twitter @worldofaora. If you want to support the show, if you've liked the show and you want to kind of help it along, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofaora. And with that said, that's pretty much everything to talk about today. Thanks everyone for joining me on today's episode of the World of Eora as we dived into the story of Fulvano, a famed explorer from the Vailian republics, and how he met his demise, the people he met along the way, and how they ended up dying, and the places that he's been, as some inspiration not only for maybe your own character in a tabletop game, but also just to look at the way that Obsidian creates these characters, and maybe we'll get a cameo or an Easter egg or something like that that gives a head nod to Fulvano in the game of Avowed. Who knows? But it was just here as an appreciation, as well as the story and some of the lore of the World of Eora at large. Thanks everyone for listening. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.